Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asban Team level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Despite being a little old island stinking up the Atlantic Ocean, the United Kingdom has a lot of iconic and acclaimed pieces of media, especially when it comes to TV shows. Doctor Who, Downton Abbey, Monty Python, and like a billion sitcoms are all big parts of our little media ecosystem, but one of my favourite, less conventional TV shows was Top Gear during its golden age. On paper it's a car show which reviews cars and discusses new cars, but it's safe to say that that's not the real reason this show became so popular. Instead, the show was popular because of all its wild and wacky antics, especially when the presenters set off to other places in the world to bring their own brand of chaos to the confused people of Bolivia, China, Africa, and the Middle East, and the far off backwards land of the US South. And thanks to my diamond level patron Daniel Shillito, I get to talk about one of these incredible international adventures, that being the fantastic Vietnam special from 2008. So hop on your closest motorbike and crack open a snake vodka with the boys, because it's time to dive into that time Top Gear took Vietnam.
It's like being on holiday with two idiots.
I want to begin this video by explaining that I'm not a car guy. Sure, I had Hot Wheels and played Scare-Electrics when I was a kid, but I never immersed myself in the guts of cars. Formula 1 was cool and all, but I never cared for V8 engines and horsepower. It still isn't my thing. I drive around in a second-hand Vauxhall Corsa that doesn't even have an aux cord, and I'm happy because it just gets the job done. Sure, I'd love to own a classic Ford Mustang, but that's just because it looks cool. However, despite all of this, I grew up absolutely glued to Top Gear. I loved it. Admittedly, my eyes tended to glaze over when the presenters were barreling along in some flashy new Audi, but I was there for the comedy, the challenges, seeing the Doctor doing time trials, and the news. It was pure fun through and through. I have a lot of childhood nostalgia for cars making ski jumps and playing sports, because for me, Top Gear was never about the cars themselves. It was about the chaos and humour of everything else. Therefore, some of my favourite memories come from the marquee episodes where they dedicate the whole runtime to some grand challenge or epic road trip. They always felt like an adventure, dialing up the banter between Clarkson, Hammond and May as they got up to no good in the wider world. The Vietnam special is one of the best of these international trips, seeing the trio arrive in Saigon where they find out cars aren't really a thing in Vietnam, at least not back in 2008. This introduces the idea of culture clashes, taking the presenters out of their four-wheeled comfort zones and forcing them to assimilate into the local culture of motorcycles, which is naturally more difficult for Jeremy. Although I suppose it's still probably easier than him learning how to stop writing hit pieces on Meghan Markle. It's a nice gimmick for the special, focusing on this different mode of transport, since bicycles and motorcycles are so common and widespread in the country. One of my favourite things about the Top Gear specials is how they showcase such interesting and different cultures, like seeing the frenzied chaos of the Vietnamese roads. It challenges our preconceptions of the world around us with these different styles of roads, a sharp contrast to the very developed and established tarmac stretches we're so used to here in the West. I know we have some motorways with more craters than the moon, but this special showcases a lot of half-built roads and rocky terrain, showing us how fortunate we actually are to have pretty much the whole country linked by stable, well-maintained tarmac roads. Obviously the trio still travel along some absolutely beautiful polished roads, but most of the episode's journey is a stark reminder of how different Vietnam can be to the UK. But despite the road differences, Vietnam is a beautiful country and that shines through in this special. Sure, everything starts off very stormy and rainy, reflecting the suffering of Clarkson's first motorbike experiences. It's the kind of muddy misery a lot of people unfairly associate with less affluent countries like Vietnam. Luckily, this then gives way to so many stunning vistas and sights with some truly stellar scenery on full display. This is one of my favourite things about Top Gear specials, because the cinematography is always so incredible, always highlighting the best visuals of wherever the episode takes place. It's nice when the trio get lost in a small rural Vietnamese village, reminding you that it's not all just about the busy cities. There are still a lot of these small beautiful settlements all over the country, like they're frozen in simpler times. It shows a lot of history and I appreciate that, shining a spotlight on the varied landscape and culture of a country which feels so far away from our own. From the bustling and chaotic cities to the lush green countryside, the Top Gear Vietnam special really captures the essence of Vietnam's diverse and natural beauty so wonderfully, and it probably serves as a better advert for the country than actual dedicated adverts or documentaries. Vietnam is an old country, very old, with evidence of human settlers dating all the way back to the Paleolithic age, where prehistoric humans were still developing basic stone tools. The region gained independence from Chinese rule in 939 AD, a year in which England as a nation turned just 12 years old and was still the centre of a tug of war between Anglo-Saxons and Danish Vikings. So it's safe to say that Vietnam has a lot of history, and for a long time probably was more developed and bountiful than the UK. However, in this day and age, there's only really one thing people know about Vietnam.
Into this setting come the first of the Screaming Eagles, the aviation crews of Company A, forerunners in the massive American military buildup to stop the communist enemy.
In November 1955, war broke out between North Vietnam, which was supported by China and the Soviet Union, and South Vietnam, which was supported by the United States and its anti-communist allies. It was a brutal and bloody war which lasted for nearly 20 years and racked up a death toll in the millions before the US forces withdrew and conceded the region to the communist forces. It was a hugely significant event in the Cold War, and due to pop culture and propaganda, it's pretty much the only thing a lot of Western people even know about Vietnam's existence. I think this is a sentiment Jeremy Clarkson perfectly sums up in the special with this fantastic observation.
I think for most people, Vietnam is a war, not a country.
Understandably, the Top Gear Vietnam special ends up touching upon the legacy of the conflict, like when they visit the Citadel, an old ruin littered with machine gun fire. As unfair as it is to only associate Vietnam with the conflict, it also wouldn't be right to pretend it never happened, because the scars are still felt. Hell, this special was made just 33 years after the official end of the Vietnam War. We literally see veterans in this episode, reminding you how real and prominent the war was, so it can't just be forgotten. Even the special itself is inspired by the conflict, since the trio have to make the 1,000-mile trip from south of the country to the north, something the US forces were unable to do during the course of the war. The music of the episode also continues to reinforce that background, constantly playing classic 60s Western music to play upon that audience familiarity of the Vietnam War and all the pop culture at the time. Oh yeah, and in typical Top Gear fashion, the trio were followed by the Spectre of Doom, which is a horrible backup motorcycle decked out in American flags and playing Born in the USA on a loop. Even though, yeah, that song was actually an anti-war message. This bike obviously makes for a fun gag, but it's also a way of showing the Western whitewashing of the conflict, because riding this through Vietnam is one of the most offensive things you could possibly do after all the atrocities the USA committed. It's a way of showing history from a side a lot of the viewers aren't familiar with. The episode displays all those lasting scars and comments on how rightfully vilified the USA often is in the country for waging this protracted and bloody conflict which caused so much destruction. However, this special goes to great lengths to show how much more there is to the country than this brutal war. It disproves a lot of misconceptions and shines a spotlight on the true beauty and uniqueness of the country and what makes it so special on its own merit. Like the touching moment of Clarkson and May stumbling upon a display of lanterns in the water. A really beautiful and aesthetic visual, creating this magical feeling of tradition and culture, because that's what a lot of the special is about, providing these cultural insights into Vietnam. The trio visit markets and get suits made, they take an overnight train and interact with the locals, all sorts of ways for them to engage with the culture and immerse themselves within it, giving the audience a glimpse into Vietnam's way of life. A lot of media like this often falls into the trap of poking fun at other cultures, making them seem backwards and primitive for their ways. The Top Gear special doesn't do that, however. Instead, it makes fun of the presenters themselves and how out of place they are as they bumble along wearing woks and buckets as makeshift helmets, sticking out like sore thumbs. It's the same kind of fish out of water humour An Idiot Abroad also mastered, rarely ever disparaging the culture or the local customs because it's just a different way of life. The Top Gear Vietnam special never mocks or chastises Vietnam for being Vietnam. Instead, it's like a comedic way of showing how hard it is for a lot of Western people to embrace such wildly different cultures because they don't really put in the effort. Like Clarkson retreating to a fancy hotel and spa because he can't handle the heat. Hammond doesn't bother to learn the language and refuses to eat anything because he hates the kind of seafood on offer. I mean, I can relate because I'm a fussy eater and I specifically hate fish, but you can't go to a country like this and expect them to cater for your own personal tastes. When Jeremy orders snakes and sparrows for dinner, it would make a lot of Westerners squirm, but it's just something they eat there, no different to us eating deer or rabbit. People in the past had to eat whatever they could find and whatever they could hunt. It's part of life, knowledge of food passed down through generations. It's a nice window into the differences in food culture, how people in different areas of the world eat completely different things. But I do think it is important to mention how the kinds of foods they show in this episode aren't typical everyday meals. They're exotic dishes, with Vietnamese people mainly eating seafood like crab and fish, or meat like beef and pork. So their typical dishes are a lot more aligned to what we know in our own geographic spheres. Although I do draw the line at them eating dogs. I don't care how hypocritical it is of me, considering I happily scoff down bacon and chicken. Dogs are just a billion steps too far for me. Although in recent years that area of the world has changed a lot of its eating habits and eat dogs a lot less. Hopefully they completely stop outright one day. Lastly, I want to touch upon the main upfront attraction of these kinds of specials, which is the wide array of goofy challenges taking advantage of the host's chemistry. Right from the beginning, the trio's choices of motorbikes are fun and telling of their personalities. Hammond goes for the practical, multi-purpose Russian Minsk, James May goes for the ancient museum piece Honda 50 Super Cub, and Clarkson, knowing nothing about bikes, buys a Vespa scooter which looks good but is completely useless for their journey and keeps breaking down, making for some brilliant comedy.
Work! Just work for 1 minute!
Hammond and May are experienced motorcyclists, so they're overjoyed at getting to speed along on 2 wheels, but Jeremy hates every second of it because he doesn't even know what to do, something shown in the delightful driving test challenge. Like I mentioned, it's really fun to take these car guys and put them in an alien world of motorbikes. Clarkson is basically the poster boy for this, because of his unfamiliarity with bikes. He bumbles around and moans the whole time about everything, which is so entertaining to see. He's always the smug buffoon, so it's like a sense of comeuppance as he's made to look like such an idiot who can't even do a figure eight on a bike. It's lovely stuff.
I am the most miserable human being alive!
The chemistry between the 3 hosts was the reason Top Gear was so popular during this period. And it's on full display in the Vietnam special as they play all these pranks on each other. From spraying Hammond's bike pink to buying a heavy statue for May to lug around, it's always a great source of comedy as we see the kinds of antics any friend group would get up to on a road trip or a holiday. They goof around together, cutting corners on their journey like claiming on a technicality that they passed their driving test as a unit, and getting on a train because they're behind on schedule, only to end up in the wrong city. I know these things are obviously scripted to an extent, but it makes for really entertaining viewing with that sense of chaos and constant twists and turns. This comes to a head with the reveal of the final challenge, having to make their bikes into makeshift boats to cross the Halong Bay. It's a great turn of events, this unexpected final part of the journey flipping the special on its head. I love these kinds of segments in the show, where the presenters have to make utter monstrosities like Scrap Heap Challenge, but with overly confident idiots who have absolutely no idea what they're doing. Once again, there's no way these guys actually made these rafts and mounted their bikes on them. They probably just tied like one knot and had the crew do the rest, but it makes for a really fun set piece to end the special in an exciting way. Obviously there's some artificial tension added, but luckily the entire special feels relatively low stakes, compared to some later specials, especially for the Grand Tour, where there would be so much obvious scripting and editing to inject danger and drama that it became hard to enjoy. This special, however, just feels like these 3 guys having a great time in a beautiful country with a strong sense of camaraderie adding to the entertainment factor. I feel like this is showcased so well as Clarkson and Hammond sit back at a bar enjoying the pathetic sight of May's raft sinking and him metaphorically limping to the finish line. It's just simple and fun, pretty much summing the whole show up in this single moment. It's not about the bikes, it's not even about the cars, instead it's about 3 idiots having fun, messing around with each other and exploring different cultures. You feel like you're along for the ride enjoying the chaos of giant model galleons and out of control rafts, which makes for a beautiful ending emphasised by Clarkson's touching recap of the adventure, one of the best recurring features of all the specials. These ending montages truly hammer home how much of a huge journey these adventures are, paying homage to all the trials and tribulations along the way as they blundered their way through such a beautiful place in the world. It's the perfect way to end the episode. So there you have it, that was the wonderful Top Gear Vietnam special. One of the best adventures the Top Gear trio ever took abroad. I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's probably one of the most concise showcases of why these episodes are so amazing and popular. It covers all the bases, from the fun challenges to the pranks and chemistry of the main trio, along with beautiful scenery and the exploration of a lot of interesting history and culture. This special challenges the viewer's preconceptions of a country known for possibly the darkest period in its history, instead allowing its true beauty and splendour to shine. This episode is a window into another world, never really shaming or belittling the culture, and instead enjoying the comedy and antics that come from throwing 3 unprepared British idiots into it. Even if you're not into cars or the technical aspects of motor travel, The Top Gear Vietnam special is always worth a watch. It's paced perfectly with all the challenges and twists keeping it from feeling repetitive, and it's generally just a great mix of comedy and documentary. It's a beautiful reminder of days gone by, when Top Gear was a top show and this trio of presenters could turn anything they touched into gold. There will never be another show like this era of Top Gear. I just don't think it's possible to capture that lightning in a bottle again. And on that bombshell, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. And an extra special thank you to my Bantam level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nick's Games, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Francois aka Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, Tom Azar, and Tifa Simp. Thank you so much for your support.